Everyone here is going to work at the new restaurant. My new restaurant, where I'm the owner. I can't deal with happy-go-lucky person like you anymore. Oh, but I'll leave the useless dishwasher behind. This place is a restaurant that specializes in vegetables. Sophie, who was a business partner, is going out on her own with all the employees except me. As if her words were the cue, the smirking staff began walking out of the kitchen one by one. Soon, the kitchen was empty except for me and Claire, the owner. Claire collapsed to her knees and sat down on the spot, mumbling, why?" as she stared at the floor. Of all days, today we had a reservation from the group that helped fund the restaurant when it first opened. It's over now. Seeing Claire slumped on the floor, I, the dishwasher, made up my mind. I'll cook. What, but, you are? Claire widened her eyes in shock as she looked at the food I had prepared, rendered speechless. Who are you really? My name is Thomas, and I work as a part-time dishwasher at this privately owned restaurant. To put it simply, this is a vegetarian restaurant. It's a place committed to organic, pesticide-free vegetables, with a focus on lunch. The soups, mains, and desserts are almost entirely vegetable-based. The offerings change daily, and there's even a corner where customers can buy vegetables. The owner, Claire, believes in helping people appreciate the natural flavor of vegetables. She also had a close friend and business partner. Hey! Don't use cucumbers that are this crooked. I know they're organic, but there's a limit to how ugly they can look. You should have some sense of aesthetics. Oh, and by the way, there'll be penalties for any cooking mistakes from now on. These vegetables are expensive, you know. The person yelling in the kitchen was Sophie, Claire's business partner. I understand that the irregular appearance of organic vegetables is inevitable. But it felt like Claire was becoming increasingly particular about both presentation and cost. During such a tense moment in the kitchen, a bright voice broke through. Great job, everyone. That's the last lunch order, so just a little more to go. Let's hang in there. Claire entered the kitchen with a smile just as Sophie stormed out. Claire asked me what had happened, so I gave her a brief explanation. Sophie is very ambitious, you know. I'm grateful for that in some ways. But for now, let's focus on our customers. The kitchen buzzed back to life. Claire then quietly said to me, there will always be problems, but as long as we stick to the restaurant's motto, we'll be okay. That's true. I replied with a smile, and Claire smiled back at me. I shared Claire's belief in letting people enjoy the true flavors of organic vegetables, the restaurant's guiding principle. But not everyone felt the same way. During the break after lunch, I was washing the last of the dishes for our final customers. A few kitchen staff were still lingering. Man, do customers even notice the difference in flavor? They probably just want to brag about eating organic veggies. And we're here putting up with all this nonsense to cook for them. Does the owner even get it? Complaints like this had become a daily routine. There was another reason for what happened in the kitchen. Just as I was about to finish my work, someone kicked me in the leg, almost making me drop a plate. Oops, my bad. You've already got an easy job, so you can't go breaking dishes, huh? I mean, this place barely uses dressing. And they ask about customers' vegetable dislikes in advance, so no leftovers come back. You just get the dishes in an easy-to-wash state and scrub them real quick. Honestly, I envy you, Mr. Dishwasher. We're the ones carrying this place. Getting nagged at all day. But really, a job as a part-time dishwasher? Isn't that just embarrassing? No kidding. At this point, I'd rather just be unemployed. They didn't bother holding back their laughter as they walked out of the kitchen. They always make fun of me before heading to the break room. Especially when there were too many complaints from Sophie. It was probably just a way to vent their frustrations. As long as they cooked properly, I didn't care. As long as they didn't betray Claire's beliefs, that was enough for me. I convinced myself of that and washed the last dish. From the time this place opened, I had watched it grow into a popular restaurant where reservations were essential. I thought this success would continue into a bright future. But an unforeseen incident changed everything. The day before, I had been off, so I came in early that morning. Whenever I was off, the dishes were usually a mess, and I often had to rewash a few. I came in early to check. Claire had mentioned she wouldn't be at the restaurant yesterday because she was visiting a supplier. Before I even entered the restaurant, I noticed something odd. In the trash area, there were boxes from a supplier I didn't recognize. Worried that something might have happened, I hurried to the kitchen. Of course, no one was there yet. It looked like no one had bothered to clean up. The sink was full of food scraps. But the scraps didn't even look like they were from the usual menu. I opened the trash bin just to check. Inside, I found piles of bags that had probably contained pre-cut vegetables like those sold at supermarkets. What on earth happened? I tried to figure it out, but then I heard voices outside. Well. It's you, Mr. Dishwasher. You're here early today, good for you. It was Sophie. She wasn't alone. There was someone else with her, a woman I didn't recognize. When I was about to ask someone, Claire came rushing in, running hurriedly. She was holding a phone in one hand, gasping for breath, unable to steady herself. Claire, your face is a mess from sweat. What's the rush? I don't care what I look like. What is this, Sophie? Claire shoved the phone screen towards Sophie. Sophie took the phone without flinching and began reading aloud. It's from the customer feedback section on our website. Even though I chose the chef's special course, the food looked nothing like the photos I'd seen before. I was shocked. Or so it says. What happened? Why wasn't I told anything about this? And, who is this person? I was just trying something I'd been planning for a while. We used pre-cut vegetables and bought everything else in bulk to cut costs. Taste can be covered up with dressing. The highlight of the dishes is now the carving. And this is someone famous for vegetable carving. The woman finally gave a slight nod as Sophie introduced her. Vegetable carving is an art form where vegetables are cut into intricate shapes, like flowers. It's far more elaborate than simple decorative cuts, closer to art than cooking. But making carving the main feature? What did that even mean? Claire looked more bewildered than I felt. You serve that as this restaurant's food? Have you forgotten what this restaurant is for? What happened to the organic vegetables? The vegetables you used for carving were mass-purchased, weren't they? Carving might be beautiful, but it completely goes against our motto of letting people enjoy whole vegetables. It might have been the first time I'd seen Claire shout so loudly. But Sophie didn't flinch. Instead, she turned the phone back to Claire. Vegetable-focused dining is outdated. Customers don't care if it's organic or pre-cut. That's not what matters anymore. This is reality, take a look for yourself. On the phone screen was a photo-sharing app with the restaurant's name searched. Claire stared silently at the screen. Perfect for social media, so photogenic. It was super cute, I took tons of pictures. I want to go again. Claire read the comments aloud in a whisper, almost as if mocking herself. Sophie, on the other hand, spoke with confidence. It's all about how eye-catching and spectacular the food is going to be. What you see now is the honest truth of the times. You have all day to think about it. Saying that, she took the phone from Claire and walked out with the other woman. Claire slumped into a nearby chair, her head hanging low. Even so, that's not what this is about. There was still time before the others would arrive. I made a cup of coffee and approached Claire. Are you okay? Yeah. Thank you. After a short silence, Claire looked up at the ceiling, closed her eyes briefly, and began to speak. I first met Sophie when she was still an agriculture student. It was during the summer break, and I was helping out on my family's farm. Sophie had seen the organic vegetables we were selling at the roadside market and was so impressed she asked if she could try farming. She stayed at our house for 2 weeks. Oh, I remember how amazed she was by the vegetable-filled soup my mom made the first time she had it. We talked a lot about our dreams, and little by little, we started discussing real plans for the future. We wanted to spread the word about organic vegetables, first by opening a restaurant and eventually by having our own farm. Claire shifted in her seat, her gaze dropping as if reminiscing about those days. We worked so hard to make organic vegetables part of everyday life. Sophie had a talent for adding beauty and color to dishes, taking traditional farmer-style meals and making them restaurant-worthy. I thought the reason for this restaurant was something we both shared. Something unchanging. Suddenly, as if snapping back to the present, Claire looked at me with an apologetic expression. Sorry. You don't need to hear all that. I just need to think about what comes next. No. I'll follow you no matter what happens, Claire. Claire blinked in surprise at my words, then smiled softly as she sipped her coffee. The day I first met Claire may not have been special to her. But to me, it was as though she had saved my life. It was a year ago, late at night. I had been sitting on a bench in a nearby park. I'd lost my job a month earlier. Slowly, I'd lost the ability to taste food, and eventually, I lost even the will to eat. Wandering aimlessly, I ended up in that park. I thought I'd just sit, but I collapsed sideways onto the bench. That's when Claire happened to pass by. Even in the darkness, with the streetlight casting a glow, I remember thinking she was a beautiful woman. Seeing my pale face, she spoke to me and draped my arm over her shoulder, half dragging me to a nearby building. It seemed to be a restaurant, though it was still under construction, with paint cans and tools scattered around. The mere thought of food made me feel nauseated again. Sorry to keep you waiting. Are you okay? Can you hold a glass? I thought something gentle on your stomach would be best. So I made a vegetable smoothie. Carrot, apple, a bit of honey, and lemon blended whole with the peel. Perfect for recovery. Here, try it. I must have unconsciously admitted I was hungry. I tried energy drinks and similar things before, but my body always rejected them. Yet, for some reason, I found myself torn between the familiar aversion to food and the unexpected desire to drink this smoothie. In the end, I took a sip. It was delicious, like it seeped into my body. The hint of lemon worked beautifully as a secret touch, enhancing the sweetness. Above all, the carrot flavor was rich and naturally sweet. Before I knew it, I had finished the whole glass. While I sat there, stunned, Claire brought me something else. This might feel like too much after the smoothie, but this is going to be one of our restaurant's main dishes. It's hot, so eat slowly. She smiled warmly and left. What she placed before me was a vegetable soup. But it wasn't just any soup, whole carrots and potatoes floated in the broth. The vegetables were so tender I could cut them with a fork. The taste was deep and rich, perfectly paired with the simple seasoning of salt and pepper. It was a dish meant to highlight the true flavor of vegetables. Oh, I'm so glad you understand. Ha! Apparently, I had spoken my thoughts out loud without realizing it. Claire told me that the vegetables were from her family's organic farm, and this place was set to open soon as an organic vegetable restaurant. We want organic vegetables to be a part of everyday life, not something special or rare. We want to spread awareness about reducing environmental impact, about how delicious organic vegetables are, and most of all, about smiles like yours. Before I knew it, I had finished the meal I had once resisted so strongly, and I realized I was smiling as I listened to Claire share her dreams. What? You lost your job, hadn't eaten, and collapsed here? Yes. I'd never known that vegetables alone could taste this good and make me feel so happy. So you mean, these vegetables were delicious? Yes, That's right. Okay, then work here. I'm Claire, the owner. Yes. Wait, what? And just like that, I started working at this restaurant. But it wasn't just that the meal had saved my life. Claire had reminded me of something I'd forgotten. That's why I decided to start over, working as a part-timer. I made up my mind to stay by her side. Thomas? Aren't you drinking your coffee? Oh, sorry. It was about time for the other staff to start arriving. We decided that we'd pretend yesterday was a special case and try to get things back to normal. I talked it over with Claire as well. It might be a brute force approach, but I felt it was the only option. Still, something felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling. That day, we were overwhelmed with inquiries asking if the carving service was still unavailable. Claire handled most of the responses, but Sophie hadn't shown her face at the restaurant since the morning. I thought the staff might vent their frustrations again today, but they quietly went about their work, and we eventually reached closing time. Claire and I exchanged a few words of relief, having somehow made it through the day. But just a few hours later, we would be thrust into a situation filled with such malice that it made us forget all about our small victory. The next morning, I arrived early again. There was still unresolved tension from the day before, and today, of all days, we had a reservation for a large group. It had been booked a month in advance, and everything should have been prepared. Yet, as usual, I was the first one there, and a sense of dread settled in my chest. The others did show up at the usual time, but something was wrong. No one was getting ready. They didn't change into their uniforms and just stood around the kitchen. I was about to say something when Claire arrived, arms full of ingredients. She smiled, though her voice wavered slightly. Hey, it's already time to start. Is something wrong? Everyone watched Claire with smirks on their faces as she hesitantly spoke up. We don't care anymore. Oh, wait, wasn't there a group reservation today? What time again? Who knows? Don't care. My stomach dropped. My worst fears had come true. I stepped forward to question them, but before I could, she arrived. Is everyone ready to say goodbye to their old stomping ground? Sophie. Sophie, what's going on? It was rare for me to speak up, and Sophie looked momentarily surprised. But then her expression twisted into one of mockery. Wow, the country bumpkin and the dishwasher really are slow to catch on, huh? Here's the deal, everyone here is coming to work at my new restaurant. A place that actually gives people what they want, not this self-indulgent mess. I've already tested everything here. And the new location is perfect, plenty of young customers. The test, you mean 2 days ago? Exactly. It proved my point. I can't believe I wasted so much time on your silly country dreams. I'm done babysitting someone who can't make anything but rustic dishes. With that, the staff began pulling off their aprons and tossing them aside, one after another. Wait, you all complained about her nagging. Why are you following her? Because the pay's better, and the location's way more popular. Who wouldn't go? It was clear now. Sophie had been working behind the scenes to win them over. They had been following her orders all along, knowing they would leave. The pieces fell into place, but it was too late. Why? Sophie? Sophie looked down at Claire, her words dripping with venom. Nobody's going to stick around for a hypocrite like you. Oh, and for today's group? Just tell them. We're out digging for potatoes in the countryside, please wait. Well, bye-bye. As if her words were a signal, the grinning staff began walking out of the kitchen one by one. Soon, the kitchen was empty except for me and Claire. Claire collapsed to the floor as if her knees had given way. A tomato she'd been holding rolled across the floor. Even so, she kept muttering, why? While staring down at the floor. I can't do this alone. Today's guests are the ones who supported us when we first opened. Sophie knows that. It's over. It's all over. Hearing the despair in her voice, I felt ashamed of even hesitating for a moment. I had promised to follow her dream. I picked up the tomato and gently helped Claire to her feet. I'll cook. What? The menu's already decided, right? Is this tomato for today's dishes? Wait, Thomas, hold on. Cook? Even if it's just vegetables, maybe I should. Ignoring her protests, I checked the fridge, grabbed a couple of bananas, and quickly whipped up 2 smoothies. I handed one to her. Thomas, you seem surprisingly confident? Claire, it's too soon to give up. Come on, we're going to be busy, let's get a boost from the banana sugar. Okay. I surprised myself with my upbeat tone, but I wanted Claire to stay positive. If we were going to get through this, she needed to smile. The guests are 6 people. I picked a special variety of tomatoes this morning just for today. But one guest can't eat tomatoes. I see. Then let's use apples for that person. Since it's a salad, and the apples we currently have are a rare variety from somewhere like Vermont. As for the main dish, oh, it's that soup, isn't it? The one with whole carrots. Yes. It's been their favorite since we first opened. Understood. I'll pace the cooking based on how they're eating. I'll get started now. Claire still looked a little uncertain, but she began preparing the dining area with quick, precise movements. I reviewed the recipes once more. Cooking times, the amount of salt, everything had been carefully detailed. It was clear how much trial and error had gone into perfecting each dish. There was no way I could let it all end here. I followed the recipes carefully, adding a slight touch of my own where I thought it would enhance the flavor. Before I knew it, the reservation time had arrived. I heard the sound of cars pulling up and lively voices filling the restaurant. It was time. When Claire came to pick up the appetizers, she looked wide-eyed for a moment, but quickly recovered. The meal began. The appetizer is a vegetable potage. Both the tomatoes and apples seemed to be well received. The main dish was the signature carrot soup, accompanied by bread made with organic wheat. I heard voices of surprise and delight as some guests tasted the dish for the first time. I had carefully chosen carrots of just the right size to avoid them being too bland and adjusted the steaming time and seasoning ever so slightly. It reminded me of the first time I had tasted this soup, and I couldn't help but smile to myself. By dessert, Claire's face had softened, and her natural smile had returned. After the meal, one of the guests, likely one of the original supporters, shook Claire's hand with a warm smile. That was truly delicious. It's even better than before, isn't it? At first, I supported you out of charity, but now, I'm a fan of this restaurant. Of these vegetables, and of you. I'll be back again. Keep up the good work. Thank you so much. Claire, looking slightly embarrassed as she received applause from the guests, glanced over at me. It seemed she had caught me peeking. We exchanged a sneaky little fist pump. After seeing the guests off and finishing the cleanup, I finally got to enjoy a well-deserved cup of coffee. The events of the morning felt like a distant memory, and I was now in a brighter mood. As I took a breather, Claire leaned in and peered at my face. Thomas, thank you so much for today. I couldn't have done anything on my own. But, can I ask you something? It was obvious what she wanted to ask. I decided that if it was Claire, I could share even the past I had kept buried, and slowly, I began to speak. About a year and a half ago, do you know the 3-star restaurant that opened for the first time here in the US? You mean the one in the hotel where even the cheapest stay costs at least $1,000 a night? Yes. I was the executive chef there. Before that, I'd worked at another restaurant in the same hotel. And after gaining experience at their overseas flagship, I was transferred. Claire's wide eyes grew even wider. Her expression made me smile faintly, loosening the tension in my shoulders just a bit. Everything had to be flawless of flavor, service, every detail. If someone couldn't keep up, they'd be reassigned or fired immediately. And it was my job to decide that. I was relentless. I made staff practice until their pinch of salt was exact to the gram. And I even evaluated how they behaved during their breaks. It was all for the sake of maintaining perfection. But I closed my eyes, recalling that day. The result was a complete boycott. When it was time to open, not a single staff member showed up. I already knew no one was coming. So I started preparing for service earlier than usual. Thomas. I let out a bitter laugh and continued. The staff had actually all been there. They were watching to see what I would do. I guess they had already given up on expecting anything from me when I started prep work without saying a word or reaching out to them. They went directly to management, and I was fired. From the hotel's perspective, it would have been a far bigger problem if the entire team quit, leaving the restaurant unable to operate. Honestly, the days after that are a blur. I kept wondering what I did wrong, but I couldn't figure it out. It was all I could think about. Gradually, I couldn't eat. I started questioning everything. Is the bread I'm holding now truly top-notch? The rice? The water? My belief that I must provide nothing but the best started to strangle me, and I couldn't escape it. Eventually, I stopped eating altogether for days, and then, that's when. The park, that night? Yes. I think I've finally figured out why I was able to eat Claire's food that day after working here and watching her. I had been so self-centered. I never once thought about the people eating my food. Sure, I remembered our customers' names and what they looked like, but I couldn't recall their expressions while they were eating. That day, Claire's dish was made with me in mind to make me smile. And it really was delicious. Today, I did my best, but I know I could never make food like that. Before I could say more, Claire stood up abruptly. What are you talking about? You said it yourself, you gave it your all today. You cooked for this restaurant, for me when I was left alone. And for our guests. You even added little touches to make the food even better, right? That's food made to make people smile. Claire. I hesitated, then carefully asked. Did I make anyone smile? At that moment, Claire's face lit up like the sun. She took my hands in hers, holding them tightly, and nodded again and again, as if trying to drive the message home. Her silent encouragement said more than words ever could. Suddenly, I felt something cold on my cheek. When I reached up to touch it, I realized I was crying. My emotions had overwhelmed me without me even realizing it. Embarrassed yet relieved, I looked directly into Claire's eyes. Thomas. Her voice was soft but filled with unwavering determination. Even though Sophie and everyone else are gone, I don't want to give up on my dream. Her words made my heart race. Will you help me? Just a little longer. She took a deep breath, then continued. Until you find your own path. Her words struck deep, filling my chest with warmth. Claire was thinking not just of her dream, but of my future as well. What are you talking about? My voice trembled, but I spoke firmly. I'll follow your dream, no matter what. At those words, Claire's eyes glistened with tears for just a moment. But she quickly suppressed them and looked at me with a determined, unwavering gaze. She squeezed my hands even tighter. The warmth of her touch carried a promise of trust, of hope, and of a shared future. For a while, we stared at each other without saying a word. In that silence, there was a sense of trust between us and a quiet hope for the future. From that day forward, Claire and I began preparing to reopen the restaurant together. We made it a fully reservation-only restaurant. Previously, we accepted reservations, but now we operated exclusively by them, ensuring that even with just the two of us, one in the kitchen, one in the front of house, we could serve exceptional food. It also allowed us to spend more time with each customer. To balance things, we closed the restaurant outside of lunch hours and began offering takeout instead. We expanded our offerings beyond the restaurant. Alongside vegetable sales, we began selling smoothies and gelato, and in the evenings, we introduced vegetable-focused bento boxes in limited quantities. By using unused vegetable parts from lunch and bento preparations for the smoothies, we reduced our food waste even further. This also allowed us to keep prices reasonable and spend more time interacting with customers. From the moment we started, the flavors were a hit, and sales began to grow steadily. During takeout hours, I often helped on the sales side as well. Seeing the customers' expressions. Talking about the food not as a mechanical explanation but as part of a conversation, these experiences brought noticeable changes within me. Thomas, you seem happier somehow. Do I? Maybe it's because the sales are exceeding expectations. Well, that's true too. Anyway, let's start the meeting. With the restaurant's operation stabilizing, we decided to take the next step. This step was tied to Claire's original dream, to make organic vegetables a part of everyday life. The biggest challenge, of course, was cost. Organic farming takes more effort, which naturally drives up prices, leaving organic vegetables stuck with the image of being luxury items. Claire groaned, almost comically, like a character in a comic. This vicious cycle is the problem, isn't it? Yes. No matter how much effort goes into growing the vegetables, if they don't sell, it's meaningless. Farmers won't want to grow them without stable buyers. That's why, a restaurant, right? Without delay, we headed to Claire's family home on our day off. We decided to start by creating a model case after discussing it together. If we could prove that transitioning to organic farming could yield stable income, it would make negotiations with other farmers easier down the line. The farm was about an hour's drive away, and when we arrived, I was stunned by the sheer scale of it. The fields stretched endlessly, producing seasonal vegetables year-round, with an impressive variety of crops. The tomatoes Claire had brought recently, those rare, high-end ones, were grown here. The dedication to organic cultivation, it turned out, had been passed down from Claire's grandparents. The more I listened, the more I realized this was exactly the kind of environment Claire had grown up in, and I couldn't help but feel convinced. As we shared a meal, we talked with her family about the future we envisioned. Knowing Claire's dream, her parents readily, almost too easily, offered their support. They agreed to expand the organic farming area and prioritize supplying their vegetables to our restaurant and the local roadside market. We formalized everything through proper contracts to ensure the partnership served as a valid model case. Watching Claire talk so passionately, I noticed how proud her parents looked. Before we left, Claire's mother said something to me that I'll never forget. Thomas, to us farmers, Claire's dream might sound like pure fantasy. But it's a beautiful dream, and we believe in it. Please, continue to support her. Farming is a long-term commitment, it takes years to see results. Taking on something new is truly challenging. Claire and I reaffirmed our resolve to take things one step at a time and give our all to what we can do right now. The days passed in a whirlwind of activity. We focused on improving restaurant service, creating seasonal menus that showcase the best of organic vegetables, and building connections with local farmers. It was exhausting work. I'd be lying if I said we weren't tired. But Claire and I were no longer alone. We always had each other. For the first time, I realized how bright the future could look when you have someone walking alongside you. Thomas, you're such a lifesaver when it comes to contracts and negotiations. I always get a bit too passionate. Claire said this one evening after we closed up shop. What brought that on all of a sudden? I think that passion of yours is important too, though. Thomas, you always speak so carefully and politely. Is that because of your previous job? Yeah. I guess it's just ingrained in me now. But maybe we balance each other out perfectly. I'll always be the partner you can rely on. I meant it as a simple, honest statement, but Claire stared at me for a moment before muttering something like, honestly, and heading off to make coffee. 3 months passed. This morning's reservation guests don't have any allergies or special menu requests, so we're all set. I was in the kitchen early in the morning, waiting for the vegetables to arrive while brewing 2 cups of coffee. When we switched to a reservation-only system, I'll admit I was anxious. But many customers who came once would immediately book their next visit. And we received high praise in a well-known restaurant review magazine, which helped tremendously. The restaurant soon gained nationwide recognition as a vegetable-focused spot where reservations were fully booked months in advance. Good morning. It smells great today too. Mind if I have some coffee? Good morning, of course, help yourself. Ah, this is the domestic coffee bean from the other day, right? It's perfect for the morning, but we should also serve it after meals soon. Lately, we had started spending these morning hours together, combining it with discussions. Even in her busy days, Claire always had a smile on her face in the mornings. But today, her smile seemed even more radiant than usual. Thomas, it looks like we've secured the funding. Now we can expand the restaurant. That's amazing. If we move away from a reservation-only system, more people will get to enjoy our food. We had taken yet another step closer to our dream. Claire fell silent for a moment but continued smiling. Then she gently held my hand. Claire? Honestly, if it weren't for you, Thomas, I would have given up back on the day everyone left me. I can't thank you enough. Thank you. What are you saying? This is just the starting line. Yeah. Let's keep going forward together. Of course. Hearing the sound of a car, Claire rushed off, and I hurried to follow her, wondering if my face was turning red. Lately, I couldn't help but get nervous when Claire looked at me or touched me. I shook off my distracting thoughts and ran outside after her. Claire had already taken care of the major tasks for the restaurant's reopening. She really was an impressive owner. The announcements, pausing reservations during the renovation period, coordinating with our contracted farmers, and hiring new staff had all been handled. That day, Sophie had insulted and looked down on Claire, but I wondered how could anyone? She was someone who always looked ahead and cared about the people around her. Someday, Sophie would realize that too. During the renovation, we didn't sit idle. We secured permits to sell food on nearby streets and continued offering takeout products. Finally, the big day arrived. The new restaurant was about twice the size of the old one, and we had also introduced a vegetable buffet during weekday lunches. The hall and kitchen teams were joined by new staff members. We all visited Claire's family home, where everyone got hands-on experience with organic vegetables, expanding their knowledge through tastings and workshops leading up to the reopening. It was as though all our hard work had borne fruit, so many ambitious and wonderful people had gathered to work with us. Everyone's efforts shone brightly on the reopening day. Customers were full of praise, and the staff expressed how happy they were to confidently answer questions. I, too, felt overjoyed that Claire and I had never given up and kept moving forward. But about a month later, an unexpected visitor arrived. During the busy lunch rush, word spread to the kitchen that a customer had demanded to see the owner as soon as they sat down. I had a bad feeling, so once lunch ended, I immediately went to the office. There she was, Sophie. I knew it. This was because I had heard rumors that the new restaurant Sophie opened, after betraying Claire, was struggling. Although it initially generated some buzz, the menu lacked variety, and dishes created solely for visual appeal failed to attract loyal customers, leading to financial difficulties. When Sophie noticed me, she smirked and spoke. "Oh, dishwashing boy, it's been a while. You should thank me for being promoted to chef by default. By the way, Claire, did you use the tomatoes I sent as a gift for your reopening? Everyone happened to be here, so we used them for smoothies." Thank you, Sophie. I remembered that we had studied tomatoes together during training, but this was the first time I'd heard those tomatoes had come from Sophie. Oh my, using them for the staff, you must be doing quite well financially. I always recognized Claire's talent as a manager, you know. Claire said nothing. The heavy atmosphere lingered, but then Sophie's tone changed. And she said it. Hey, why don't we work together again? Claire looked surprised for just a moment, but quickly regained her serious expression and replied. Why? Claire, it's not good to hold grudges. This restaurant has grown bigger and gained recognition. Don't tell me you're still clinging to the silly idea of promoting organic vegetables? Now is the time to make this place go viral my way. Don't you get it? No, it doesn't matter if you don't. I can do it. If we don't cash in now, when will we? This place is only thriving because of the novelty. Your ridiculous, self-satisfying ideals are just in the way. We need to make a huge profit and pull out before the trend fades. Then, we can start something new and trendy again. That's how we'll join the ranks of the rich and famous. Trust me, just leave it all to me. Sophie spewed out her words rapidly, eyes wide, her voice rising as she confronted Claire. What she meant by "let's do this together again" wasn't the future we had once dreamed of and talked about. It was simply a way to make money. I turned to look at Claire. Claire had her eyes closed. Then, she slowly opened them. Maybe I was foolish to hope, just like you said, Sophie. Sure, money is necessary, but that's not what I want to grow. When you sent me those tomatoes, I already had a feeling. You know a lot about flowers and vegetables. Tomato flowers mean perfection. But the tomatoes you sent were bulk buy ones. You were telling me that spreading organic produce was hopeless, weren't you? Sophie. We just can't understand each other anymore. Then, Claire spoke to Sophie in a clear, firm voice. Please leave. Sophie shot up from her chair so forcefully that it nearly tipped over. She glared at Claire. Ah, is that so? I can't believe how angry I am at my younger self. My greatest mistake was meeting someone as delusional as you. Listen. Dreams are for kids. When you're an adult, money is everything. If you don't get that, then you're just an arrogant fool. You'll see you'll hit rock bottom and regret this. Hurling those bitter words behind her, Sophie stormed out, her footsteps loud and unrelenting. Claire remained silent for a moment, then let out a deep breath and turned to me. I do like flower fields, but I think I'll stick with vegetable fields. Despite her faint, sad smile, I could tell her words were masking the pain of a final break with an old friend. I'll help you grow them. Ha! Thank you. This was, no doubt, a turning point for Claire. But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling left by Sophie's parting words. A few days later, an unexpected offer came to the restaurant. It was from a magazine that had previously given us high praise. They wanted to feature our restaurant in a popular critic's column. This critic, though likely writing under a pen name, was famous in the food industry, someone said, to influence trends. His sharp, unfiltered reviews were part of his appeal, though he never revealed his face. It was an all-or-nothing kind of situation. To accept was to gamble. Claire understood this perfectly. She stared at the email in deep thought, then took a sip of coffee and quickly sent her reply, an acceptance. You've got to believe in doing it at 100%. That's what this restaurant is all about. Exactly, Thomas. We both smiled, ready to take on what felt like a challenge. Finally, the day of the review arrived. I hadn't told the staff about today's events on purpose since we were asked to provide our usual service. Instead, I handed out banana smoothies to everyone, simply as a little boost to keep us going for the day. 5 minutes before the scheduled time, the door opened, and 2 men walked in. From the kitchen, I peeked out to see them. And my mind went blank. No, my head was filled with words I couldn't forget, no matter how hard I tried. You're the one who destroyed my future. Don't ever forget that, for the rest of your life. If he realized I was working here, the review would undoubtedly be a 0. I had to leave. I had to tell everyone I was stepping back immediately. But if I left now, before a new leader had fully stepped up, it would throw the kitchen into chaos. My thoughts swirled, unable to settle. Then I faintly heard Claire's voice. Thomas? What's wrong? It's time for the main dish. Claire, today, no, from now on, I can't be a part of this restaurant anymore. What? I forced the words out through my haze. That younger guy with the critic? His name is Nathan. He used to work under me at my previous restaurant. A former colleague? Wait, does that mean? He was full of talent and effort. He was motivated, too. As for me, well, as I told you before, I wasn't. That day, I let him season the soup for the first time. I had the sous chef check it, but when I tasted it later, something was just a little off. I decided it was a slight misjudgment in the amount of salt and sent him to apologize to every table. The next day, he handed in his resignation. He waited until I was alone in the kitchen, folded up his apron, and with eyes full of resentment, he said, "You ruined my future. Don't ever forget that, for the rest of your life." Even though I eventually left the restaurant as well, I could never forget those words. Just remembering them made my chest tighten painfully. Perhaps sensing that, Claire gently placed her hand on my back. It wasn't entirely his fault. I had been told the usual salt was out of stock and that it would be replaced. But I never got around to tasting the new one myself. And it ended up being him who used it for the first time. It was such a subtle difference that only someone with exceptional taste could even notice. But when I found out later, I told myself it was Nathan's lack of professional awareness. That he wasn't first class. I was terrible. I turned toward Claire. I don't deserve to cook for him. If he finds out I'm here, it'll be a massive blow to the restaurant. I'm sorry, but Claire pulled her hand away from my back, grabbed both my hands, and held them close to her chest. Then, she spoke softly, almost in a whisper. You are the chef of this restaurant now. I've seen the countless smiles your cooking has brought to our customers. That's who you are now, Thomas. If anyone says anything, I'll apologize right alongside you. So, let's have him taste it, okay? Her words and smile brought all the memories of the time I'd spent here, Claire, the staff, and our customers flooding back into my mind. I don't think I'm entitled to expect anyone to understand who I am now. Instead, as the chef of this restaurant, I needed to serve the best dish I possibly could. Chef? Could you taste this for me? Is now a good time? Oh, yeah. I'm coming. Oh no. Good. As always, we combined our efforts to create the best main course. The last order was finished, and as the two men sipped their coffee, Claire was finally summoned to their table. From the kitchen, I watched, though I could only catch snippets of their conversation. The man who had been scowling earlier began to speak loudly, his voice carrying throughout the restaurant. Owner, huh? I'm not saying it's bad, okay? But have you heard of the phrase, food should be enjoyed with the eyes, too? This restaurant? Not cutting it. The whole vegetables-only concept doesn't work these days. Do you think people want to take pictures of this stuff? You should research the younger demographic. It's lame, unsatisfying, and looks poor. Vegetables only and overpriced. I could go on forever. But hey, it'll make for an easy article. Now, let's go grab some meat afterward. His words echoed loudly, closer to complaints than an actual review. He was nitpicking flaws, broadcasting them for everyone to hear. I see. Claire only said that much, waiting quietly for the other man to speak. He said nothing for a moment before finally turning to Claire. "I'd like to speak to the chef." "Huh? Claire glanced toward the kitchen nervously. A staff member made a big OK sign with their hands, signaling it was fine. From the kitchen, I pressed my hands together and bowed slightly toward the man, taking deep breaths to steady myself. I couldn't just face him, I had to face all the people and mistakes of the past, too. Whatever he said, I would accept it. More importantly, I wanted to help Claire, who had just endured those harsh words alone. "Thomas." "Yes. I'll go." Claire and I approached the table, and I greeted them with a bow. The man who had been complaining earlier looked like he had more to say, but Nathan's silence seemed to hold him back. Nathan took a sip of water, looked at me directly, and I saw it, the recognition in his eyes. He knew exactly who I was. And from their conversation earlier, it was clear that Nathan was the actual critic. What would he say? Would he say nothing at all? If this restaurant took a hit, I was prepared to do whatever it took, even if I had to grovel. Nathan set his glass down and finally spoke. "So it really is you, Thomas?" "Yes." That was all I could say as I bowed deeply. "Raise your head." Honestly, I'd heard rumors from former colleagues that someone like you was working here at an organic vegetable restaurant. I couldn't believe it. But when I tasted this main dish, I knew. It had to be you. You know, back then, I used to drink leftover soup, trying desperately to figure out how to catch up to your level. His tone was casual, almost nostalgic, but I couldn't bring myself to look at him. That's when Claire stepped in. Thomas has been giving his all for this restaurant and for our customers every single day." Desperately trying to explain, Claire's words were stopped by his outstretched hand and a smile. "All right, I understand. Thomas, you were always creating dishes and spaces that delivered first-class quality. In a way. I thought that was your way of thinking about the customers. But there weren't many who could keep up with your strictness, myself included. After that incident, I left the restaurant, consumed by anger and resentment." He took another sip of water and this time turned his entire body to face me. Even though we had worked together, I was only now seeing his face clearly for the first time. "Thomas, I always thought about you. In the end, I couldn't leave the culinary world behind. But I often wondered about you, whether you gave up cooking when you left the restaurant." Standing up, he continued, his shoulders trembling, his words breaking apart. "I was truly sorry back then. I said those things hoping you'd regret everything. But even so, quitting like that. I shouldn't have done it. In the end, I ended up hurting myself as well. Thank you for continuing to cook. Chef Nathan. Not only did you maximize the flavor of organic vegetables, but you created depth, vibrance, and satisfaction in every dish. You truly are an incredible chef. It was a top-rated restaurant." Tears welled up in his eyes as he looked at me. A mixture of gratitude and regret overwhelmed me, and I burst into tears, even more than he did. I was the one who was immature. I felt useless, and it wasn't until I hit rock bottom and experienced kindness that I realized what truly mattered. I couldn't see it back then. I don't even have the words for you now. Chef. "Huh?" Nathan firmly gripped my hand and said, "All the words were already in your cooking. Thank you." "Oh, thank you." With Claire smiling warmly beside us, I finally felt like I could move forward. But then, a loud bang echoed through the restaurant as someone slammed the table. "What the hell, Nathan? Why'd you have to ruin the mood like this? The job this time was to give this place the lowest rating, remember? The pay was insane too. And now you're declaring it a top-rated place with that dumb sob story? What are you gonna do now?" The other man, who had been silent until now, suddenly began shouting violently, spewing out a string of unsettling words. Nathan let go of my hand and began to explain the truth. What he said is true. Back when I was just starting as a critic, I sometimes accepted jobs to write articles to get my name out there. Someone from that time reached out again. They said if I didn't comply, they'd expose everything I'd done before, so I couldn't refuse. Was the job what that guy just mentioned? Yes. I was paid to give a specific rating. This time, they wanted me to give the restaurant the lowest score possible. In the heavy silence that followed, the man stood up and clapped Nathan on the shoulder. "Hey, there's still time. Just say something right now. Oh, and throw in a story about this chef too, it'd get views. Former abusive head chef. Sloppy and overpriced food, sound good? Stop it already." Nathan's shout rang through the restaurant. Without hesitation, he grabbed the man's phone, or he had been taking notes, and dropped it into a glass of water. "What the hell are you doing? I'm done. I've had enough of this. I'm finally ready to move forward. I'll never write lies for money again." The man flinched at Nathan's serious glare, snatched the phone out of the water, and spat bitter words at him. "Your life is over, you hear me?" Leaving those parting words, the man stormed out. "Are you sure?" In response to my question, Nathan smiled as he gathered his belongings and turned back. A man who's climbed out of rock bottom shouldn't be saying that to me. I'll evaluate this place with my own words. Don't worry. Now wasn't the time to say it, but I couldn't stop myself from sharing what was in my heart as Nathan prepared to leave. "It's late, but I always admired how hard you worked. I thought we'd be working together forever. That's why I trust you. I'll leave the rest to you." Nathan nodded with a smile, left a final word, and walked out of the restaurant. Afterwards, we offered coffee to the customers as a gesture, and the chaotic lunch service came to an end. Claire and I sat facing each other in the office. When I heard the word job, I honestly had a feeling. "You too, Thomas?" "Yeah, me too." Nathan had told us the identity of the person who requested the job just before leaving. I can't believe it was Sophie. There's no point in thinking about it now. Let's leave the article to Nathan. Despite the serious conversation, Claire was smiling for some reason. "What's so funny? Thomas, the worry has completely disappeared from your face." "I'm glad." "Ah, haha." As I let out an awkward laugh to hide my embarrassment, Claire stood up and leaned in close, almost right in front of me. But the tear stains are still very visible. Saying that, she casually pulled out a handkerchief and gently wiped my cheeks. A strange mix of ticklishness and comfort overwhelmed me, but with her face so close, I couldn't open my eyes. My face was probably flushed red, so much so that the tear stains weren't the only thing noticeable. A month later, the magazine we'd been dreading was finally published. The moment I held it in my hands, my chest tightened. Flipping through the pages, there it was, our restaurant, given the lowest possible rating. The same venomous words that man had spat that day were now printed boldly in black and white. Every line I read weighed heavily on my stomach. Under normal circumstances, this would spell the end for a restaurant. Reputation would plummet, customers would stop coming, and eventually, the doors would close for good. That hopeless future flashed through my mind. But we still had hope. Nathan had stepped up. He went directly to the weekly magazine, revealing everything through an exclusive interview. He confessed that the article was fraudulent, driven by financial transactions behind the scenes. Shockingly, he also admitted that he himself had taken part in similar actions earlier in his career. Nathan's courageous confession sent ripples through the industry. Social media was flooded with praise for his honesty and bravery. At the end of the interview, Nathan had this to say: "My real review of this restaurant is on my social media. From now on, I'll share my thoughts with pride and respect as someone who once worked in the culinary world." I deeply apologize for the trouble I've caused." Reading those words brought tears to my eyes. Nathan had accepted his mistakes and was bravely taking his first steps forward. When I glanced at Claire, her eyes were also glistening with tears. We nodded silently at each other, squeezing each other's hands tightly. The chaos brought a wave of interview requests and media inquiries. But our stance remained consistent. Come to the restaurant and see for yourselves. As a result, multiple outlets gave us glowing reviews, and the magazine in question eventually issued a public apology. Even now, long after the dust settled, our restaurant remains full of customers, and I feel nothing but gratitude. As for Sophie's restaurant, it quietly closed down just the other day. I only found out when one of the staff members who had once quit en masse returned, asking for their job back. It was a familiar face, one that had vented their frustrations on me in the past. I didn't say a word and left the decision to Claire. The office grew tense, but Claire flashed a smile brighter than ever and said, "All right, let's work together again. Thank you so much." Her immediate decision surprised me, but it was just like Claire. However, she didn't forget to mention one important detail. "Starting tomorrow, you'll be in charge of washing dishes and cleaning mud off the vegetables. Make sure to learn from the senior staff. Lunch service gets super busy." "Huh? Dishwashing." Okay." The slight disappointment on their face would vanish by tomorrow, once they experienced the pace and significance of the work. No task in the restaurant is insignificant. As lunch service was wrapping up, I headed back to the kitchen. Just then, the door opened, and a lone woman walked in. "Are you still serving lunch?" The staff started to explain that lunch hours had ended, but I stopped them and led her to a table. She looked frail, her face pale and devoid of energy. It was Sophie. I passed Claire in the back hallway and told her a guest had arrived before returning to the kitchen. Sophie sat there, head down, not even touching the glass of water in front of her. "Sophie, you look awful. Are you eating properly? Ha? You know what I've done, and you're still worried about me? Do you have that much free time? Or is it kindness? Pity?" Her lifeless sarcasm only deepened the feeling of emptiness in the room. As the two women sat in silence, I brought out a dish and set it in front of her. "Apologies, but lunch service has ended. I made this with what we had available. I hope that's all right." Sophie stared at the dish for a long moment before saying quietly, "It's fine." Just as I turned to leave, her voice stopped me. "Chef, may I speak with you for a moment?" "Of course." Bathed in the steam rising from the dish, Sophie began to speak in a halting tone. "I was born into a farming family, you know. The traditional kind. Our house was far from the fields, so we'd drive out in a truck every morning. I'd go straight to school with mud still on me. Then after school, I'd help with packing shipments. It was the same thing day after day. No time for fun, no time for love. Eventually, I began to hate it all. My parents said I could go to university as long as it was for agriculture. So I did. But really, I just wanted to leave. I swore I'd never go back." She paused, picked up her fork, and began breaking apart the vegetables in the soup. "But then I hit a wall with my research and signed up for a farming experience program to gather material. Oh, how I wish I could tell my past self if I hadn't gone to that field, if I hadn't met you. I wouldn't have started dreaming of something new." Sophie glanced briefly at Claire before taking a bite of the vegetables. Her voice trembled as she turned to Claire. "I wish I hadn't thought it was so delicious." "Sophie." Wiping a tear from her face, Sophie turned to me. "Chef, this is the dish I first ate at Claire's home, isn't it? You didn't have to do this." "Yes. Claire told me how much you loved it back then." "I see." Claire placed her hands on the table and stood, leaning closer to Sophie. "Hey, Sophie, I still want to." Stop. I can't look to the future with you anymore. My vision is too clouded. I just can't. Both of them were crying now. So close, yet the distance between them felt insurmountable. I clenched my fists, frustrated by my inability to do anything. Sophie suddenly lifted her head and exhaled deeply. Honestly, I only came here to throw one last jab at you. But this dish is unfair. Claire, until I can see the future clearly again, I'll leave you in the chef's hands. When I'm able to stand beside you once more, I'll come back. Now, lunch is over, isn't it? Let's end this here. She waved us off dismissively, and Claire and I stepped back. Sophie quietly ate, occasionally wiping her eyes, and then left the restaurant. Afterward, Sophie returned to her family farm. Using her university knowledge of fertilizers and soil, and the expertise she had gained from meeting other farmers during our restaurant's early days, she convinced her family to start organic farming. It would be some time before Sophie's farm became so popular that we'd announce delivery dates in advance, but that's another story. 6 months later, Claire and I stood together in front of a vast stretch of land. It was finally ours, this empty place, soon to be our treasure. It's such a beautiful spot. I can't believe it was just sitting here unused. Which is why we got it at such a good price. Let's just say it was waiting for us until we were ready to buy it. That's a lovely way to put it. I gently took Claire's hand, and she squeezed mine in return. This land was barren for now, once a field long ago. From here, our new dream would begin. It might take years of trial and error before we could grow organic vegetables good enough to serve at the restaurant. By then, organic vegetables might be a natural part of daily life. However long it takes, I'll be right here with you. You know. I can't believe how much of my life revolves around vegetables. It's funny when I think about it. Mine turned out the same. Sharing this life with someone sounds pretty great to me. As we stood there, gazing over the land, Claire suddenly pulled her hand away, stepped in front of me, and, for some reason, looked slightly annoyed. Then, she started questioning me in a firm tone. Thomas, hey. I've been meaning to say this for a while now. What's with all these misleading comments? You're going to make me misunderstand. What exactly are you misunderstanding? You know, stuff like however many years it takes or being together forever, that kind of thing. Seeing Claire's face turn so red over something unrelated to vegetables was rare, and, as always, it made her even more adorable. Should I stop saying those things? Claire? You're impossible. Her answer didn't come in words. Instead, as I felt her warmth, I quietly closed my eyes. Years from now, I'm certain we'll still be here, sharing dreams for the future as this place blooms into vibrant colors. A helping hand might be out there anywhere, unseen. But whether that hand belongs to an angel or a devil is something you'll only realize when the time comes. And when you do, the choice to hold on or let go. That's a decision only your own hand can make.